Hey everybody, welcome to the TEConnect podcast. I'm John Martin.
And I'm Dean Reverman.
It's another Dean and John special, just the two of us riffing about a topic. Today we are going to talk about effective sales presentations. This is kind of a passion project of sorts for me.
Right? Okay.
Because I've worked sales in the past, and we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yep.
And it's something that I've seen very bad presentations. I've seen good presentations. I've learned some interesting methodologies for presentations. So we want to talk about that with you and tell you a little bit about, what you should be thinking about. What are the cliches of presentations? What are some things you should do, shouldn't do? And then I'll talk a little bit about a presentation technique that I learned that I think is useful and effective in a lot of different situations. So with that said, it is time for us to plug in and get connected.
Welcome to the TEConnect podcast. It's time to get connected.
All right, as I mentioned, our topic today, sales presentations. Dean,
Yep.
what's your experience in sales? Did you have to do a lot of presentations?
Oh my gosh, what's my experience in sales? Well, if I could go back a little bit for you, John. So coming out of college, I cut my teeth selling copiers for what was then Scott Business Systems, what turned into Icon Office Solutions, and it was a great way to learn selling because when I went to school, didn't learn how to sell at all.
Right.
So like most people, I was looking for, some way to get experience along the way. And the interesting thing about copier sales is that we went up against some true, I will call like trench hardened sales guys and gals in the sales force against Xerox. So Xerox was like, this behemoth for the 70s, 80s, into the 90s. I mean, if you are a sales rep for Xerox and you had any tenure, you could sell in a classical sense. And I think we're going to get into that today.
Right.
What the classical sense of selling would be, always be closing and stuff like that. So we would compete against those guys. That's who I would compete against. So I was there for a couple years. And then my next career move was I ended up becoming the director of sales and marketing for a reseller. And so I wore kind of both hats. So I have been selling, like over 15 years of sales experience.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I got a little bit, not long in the tooth, but I got some experience. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
What about you?
So my first real job, if you want to call it that, was in retail. So that's not like
retail sales?
Yeah, it was a bookstore.
Okay.
A bookstore.
Yeah.
So like nothing that I had to go out of my way to sell stuff there. Then I transitioned over to higher ed publications, higher ed textbooks. So that was a sales gig. I moved through different sales stages there. Was an actual foot on the ground kind of sales. It was actually inside sales, but I did get to go out and travel sometimes. And then I did sales manager for a while. My last gig before coming to BlueStar was with a food service equipment supplier, and there was a lot of presentation-y stuff that went on there. We were again inside sales. I traveled maybe a little bit more there, so you got to get in front of people. But there was a heavy presentation aspect, and it's where I learned this kind of technique that we're going to talk about later. So yeah, I had to do my fair share of presentations. Everything from endless PowerPoints to product demonstrations, and it's not my favorite thing in the world to do. There's a reason why I'm in marketing now, and there's a reason why I'm sitting behind a mic. But I do feel like between the two of us, we have a lot of experience in it, and I think we have a lot of insight. And let's be honest, sales and marketing do go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a great presentation usually has a marketing aspect to it, don't you think?
No doubt about it. And I think that there are people that are good at selling and there are people that are good at presenting. Yep. Sometimes it's hard to get somebody who can do both. And so from a presentation standpoint, man, I've been involved in a lot of them as well. Yeah. I've been involved in some presentations for, high dollar deals that we're trying to go down, to very small presentations, training and stuff like that. So, between the two of us, it sounds like we're bringing a lot of experience to the table here.
Yeah.
Who knew?
Well, again, as with our last podcast where it was just us, we're going to solve the world's problems.
I love it.
By the time we're done with this, you're going to have every sales presentation. You're going to get it exactly right. You're going to sell everything you want to. You're going to make all your goals.
And I think what's important here as we dive into it is that sales has changed, presentations have changed. Society has changed. So, when I think back about, early in my career and the type of sales techniques that I was taught, and of course the tools that we had were completely different than what we have available today. I mean, I didn't even have a laptop. Now I'm going back a little bit, but I actually got a laptop right before I left that first job. But anyway, so the tools are different, the techniques were different, just a different world, if you will. But there's a lot that can be said about good presentations at the end of the road.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. So, one of the things I was thinking of when I was debating this topic and thinking about how I wanted to structure this is, first of all, like the way people approach getting to presentations, I think can be a little bit flawed. So, I wrote down like on our notes here, can I have a half hour of your time?
No,
like how many times have you received an email or a, random phone call from someone that said, hey, can I get a half hour of your time? I want to talk to you about X, Y, Z and how my product can do this and can do that and do this, where they're trying to basically sell you and present to you just while they're trying to literally ask for the opportunity to do a presentation. And I feel like that's something that automatically turns you off right there. Like when someone comes and asks for your time, it's hard enough to ask for people's time as it is. But if you're right out of the gate asking for half an hour, that's a little problematic, I think. So kind of the way I want to think of this, I want to break this up in a few stages. One, I want to talk a little bit about the cliches rather of presentations. And we were talking just before we got on here, when I was thinking about this, I started thinking about some of the cliched versions of sales that you've seen like in TV and film. And one of the first instances that came to mind was the movie Glengarry Glen Ross, which has that infamous scene with Alec Baldwin. I'd tell us to throw in a snippet of it, but it's very profane, and we're a clean podcast.
We can't do that. Right.
But it is a worthwhile scene if you don't mind a little profanity. Yeah. It is a great scene to watch if you've ever seen the movie. But it is classic.
It is classic.
Exactly. Like the whole premise of it is he walks into this sales office where there's these four guys who are not getting the job,
not executing, not getting it
right. They're selling property. They're not getting it done. They squander the leads, or at least that's what the boss's perception is and the higher-up's perception is. So he comes in and gives them this huge speech, and he tells them, always be closing, coffee's for closers. There's a lot of other stuff that he says, just adamantly drilling into them like, your life should be built around selling and closing, and you're a worthless human being and a piece of trash if you don't. And I think you see that replicated quite often, and to this day, I feel like that particular scene is still held up as like this is an icon of sales and how sales should be. But as you just mentioned, sales has changed a lot over the years, and I don't think, while that method still exists and it is still one that some people hold near and dear to themselves, I don't know that it's the most effective way of sales these days. I think there's a lot more nuance to it than just battering someone into buying something. And,
persuasion, the act of persuading.
Yeah, exactly.
Arm twisting them until they buy. And I think that's part of what we're getting into here today, because I've always been of the opinion that the close, and this isn't a sales podcast, so and maybe we'll do that, at a different time. But the close should be the easiest thing.
Yep.
You shouldn't have to arm wrestle somebody into buying yours. Now, I have been in situations where it is a fast deal and things are moving very quickly, and aggressive sales reps, that use some of these old techniques, sometimes can win the day because they're very persuasive type people. But that is more of a rarity, I think, especially in today's world where the consumer, if you will, and that can be a business to business consumer, is coming to the meeting so well educated. There's Google, there's online, there is so much information out there that an individual or an entity can come into the sales process already knowing that that a lot of that is now it's about doing a proper presentation and stuff like that.
Right. And I think also, and this is something I think we'll dive a little further into as well, there is a distinct difference between selling a product versus selling yourself or your company. And I think modern sales and modern presentations tend to revolve a lot about selling you and your company and why you should be the person that they work with. Because let's be honest, there's not a lot of unique products anymore. There's not a lot of products that exist that only you have and only you can sell.
So
you may literally be, and speaking to our VARs that listen to this podcast, you may literally be selling the same products as 50 other VARs in your area trying to go after the same customer.
Yep.
So instead of maybe selling the product, it might be a lot about selling who you are, what you understand about that company, why they should be working with you and your company and buying those products from you rather than someone else. And price isn't always going to be the factor.
Right.
Like, sometimes it is.
Yep.
But I'd say more often than not, price is not the selling point. If you are, priced 10% higher than your competitor, but your customer thinks that they're going to get a better experience and you understand them better, they're probably going to be more inclined to go for you, unless the bottom line is the only thing that matters to them.
Thus, the value-added reseller,
Exactly.
right? The value add you're bringing to the table. But we're not here to talk about that. We're talking about sales presentations.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So I want to start off by, let's talk about some of the things that don't work for presentations.
Yep.
And I'm going to kind of rattle these off, and then we'll, dive into them a little bit further. Okay. So one of the things that I've been taught for a long time, was always taught in, presentations and in sales in general, is this concept called either feature dumping, show up and throw up. There's other ways you can phrase it. The idea that you walk into a presentation or to a sales situation and try to tell everything there is to know about your product, regardless of any knowledge of whether your customer needs all those features or not. The way I like to think of it is, you go to a car lot, for instance, and you walk in and a car salesman comes up to you and says, hey, you looking for a new car? Like, yeah, I am. Well, hey, come over here. I've got the new 2020 Ford F-150. It's, got this kind of motor in it. It's got all these bells and whistles. You can, you can haul up to, 30,000 pounds or whatever of trailer or whatever you need. It's got all this, it's got a rack on the top for, your equipment and stuff. And you're thinking, I came here for a sports car. I don't haul stuff around. Yeah, I'm just a dude who wants a nice car to drive around.
Yeah, that's nice
town.
and all, but
and they never bothered to ask you about that. They were, or even if they did, they only asked you, "What are you looking for?" And you say, "Well, a sports car," and they just showed you the flashiest, coolest one on the lot. Again, nothing about who you are. So there's that, and that leads into not having insight into your customer, not understanding who your customer is. I feel like that's always a problem in a lot of presentations and sales. Not asking a lot of questions. And death by PowerPoint, or death by presentation in general, which is the sense of having a presentation where you're just asking somebody to watch a bunch of slides or watch you talk about a product for half an hour without much input or discussion going on. So what do you think about those?
God,
any other no-nos that you'd
these?
add?
I don't know. I mean, I read this before the podcast, and this is dead on. What doesn't work? Feature dumping. You cannot walk into a presentation. Let me put it this way. If you walk into a presentation and you take over the room and you're doing nothing but showing your features of whatever your product is, guaranteed you have lost the audience, and they're doing nothing but lip service to get you out of the room as fast as they possibly can. Feature dumping does not work. And the note that I made to myself as you were talking, John, and I firmly believe in this, it takes a little bit of homework. Look, if you've worked really hard to get a presentation and you actually get somebody to give you time, whether that's in person or whether that's virtual, online today, do a little bit of homework. Do the due diligence. That's what great salespeople do, is that they'll try to connect the dots. They'll learn a little bit about the customer they're walking into. And your point, though, is really valid, too, because I think about a lot of our resellers. Maybe they're a POS reseller, and that's what they've been doing all day long. Right. I sell this. It's a point of sale system. So my presentation to the next restaurant or the next retail establishment is pretty much going to be the same, because this is what I do. This is my features and benefits. Don't do that.
And you've got all that memorized. You're an expert in those features.
You're an expert at it, but don't do that.
Right.
Everybody is unique. Everybody feels like they're unique. You got to treat them as unique. So even though you sold it to this POS system to XYZ restaurant, 1, 2, 3 restaurants gonna be different, right? Even if it's a different menu, if it's a different whatever it is, figure out what their differentiation is and bring that into your presentation.
Agreed.
So feature dumping does not work, but that does speak to your second point of getting insight into the customer, right? You want to understand at least some of their pain points, and if you can't, you can only learn so much online. There's only so much research you can do. So I was always a fan, and still to this day, I'm a fan of a sales rep who will genuinely start the conversation about what am I looking for?
Right.
And so I can frame this presentation around the needs of the customer, right? You got to have that customer insight. And again, if you can only find so much before you walk in the door, but I always made a point of it to say, hey, look, I've got this presentation. I'm good to go here, and that's what we're going to do today. But I want to hear from you first. And then queue up some questions so that you could get that insight. That's brilliant. You got to ask the questions, right? You got to be insightful while you're having that dialogue along the way. Before I even started presenting anything, The first 10, 15 minutes, I'm sitting back, I'm listening, right?
Right.
What is the old phrase? God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth, kind of a thing. Use them, use them appropriately.
Should be listening more than you talk.
Right? I mean, you really need to. Even if you have your presentation, you think it's all buttoned up, you know exactly what you're going to say, doesn't matter. Walk into the room, be open, ask questions, because the presentation can go in a completely different direction than what you thought you were going to do. And I can tell you this, through the dialogue that you're having, you will have a much more meaningful presentation now addressing whatever was brought up in the room. You know, oh, I know you're in here to talk digital signage, but I actually need a new point of sale, or the inverse. I know you're here to sell me point of sale, but I actually got this digital signage or this networking issue or this video camera issue or something like that. You know, you got to be flexible along the way. PowerPoint, do not just walk through your slides, right? Now you need to tailor the story that you're telling, your presentation, to what you just learned along the way. That is an awesome list of what not to do.
Well, because it is all the things that bug me. It was all the things that I was taught not to do.
Right.
It was all the things that if I was presented to or sat in a presentation that made me just, grate my teeth and clench my fists together and be like, why are we doing it this way? Like, it doesn't need to be this way. And, and I don't know about you, but in my various sales roles, I went through a lot of different sales trainings as well. Like, it felt like every company I ever worked for always felt like every year they were often bringing, this is especially when I was in the publishing side, like it always felt like every year we brought in a different new type of selling or a new, training we had to go to, or someone to come in and
new
coach
mousetrap.
us. Right, exactly.
This person's got it now.
Exactly.
Right.
And they almost always said very similar things. It was almost always the same thing. Or sometimes they blatantly contradicted one another. And most of them I just like, all right, I'll take that away from it as useful. But I feel like there was a lot of them that never really got it right and never really, either they were all kind of looking at the same place from different angles, or they were contradicting each other entirely. So you get to the point where you're like, well, how am I supposed to do this? Like, am I supposed to be in here badgering away, or am I supposed to just lay back and, let it come to me? Am I supposed to be semi-aggressive? Like, where do you draw the line? And I don't feel like, I feel like a lot of times there's a lot of mixed messages around that, which is why probably salespeople don't quite know what to do sometimes.
It's got to be confusing. And it's got to be, I haven't taken a sales class or whatever in years. I know exactly what you're talking about, though, the type of training that was done back in the day, if you will, and even what it might look like today. But all I can tell you is the experience that I've had, having sat through, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of presentations that I've had to give. I can tell you that sometimes you're forced into a feature dump, sometimes because you'll walk into a room and you're set up for the presentation and the people in the room are not engaging, or maybe they're not the decision maker, they're an influencer. And so they're only somewhat committed to whatever this is, the project or whatever. And so sometimes you have to go, okay, this is just a typical presentation. I got to check the box here. I got to convey to you all the things that our company does really well and stuff like that. But man, even that is so few and far between. You got to make some connection and make that presentation sing a little bit more. I really feel like, and I don't know if this was one of the points you were going to make, a good presentation can absolutely set the stage for your differentiation.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You are trying to differentiate yourself from everybody else out there. Whether you might have the same widget, but the presentation, again, if you actually have that capability to walk in or have that meeting with somebody, now's the chance for you to really start differentiating yourself. Yeah.
Big time, yeah. And you kind of mentioned the different sales trainings. Now there's some stuff you will come across. And it's funny because as you were talking about that, you were picking up your pen, and it made me think of that classic maneuver.
Right? Yeah.
Sell me this pen. Like Wolf of Wall Street references that. That's like I think the very end of the movie they reference that. Another movie that's filled with profanity. Like apparently just sales is all about profanity. That's what they learned from it. So,
but two classics.
Yeah, but again, that was another film that was all about this idea of like sales being a trick. Like how do you con someone into buying something rather than actually being consultative and caring and listening or whatever. And that whole idea of sell me a pen is one of those things. I'm like, if that's your approach to starting how to do sales training, you're already off the mark because it's just not that simple. Like it's not that simple to ask somebody to sell you a pen when they know nothing about who you are or why you might want to. Do you even want a pen? So let's shift then and talk about the stuff that does work. And I think we've hit on a lot of that already in talking about the things that don't. So the list that I came up with here was relevant features. So if you are going to talk about features of a product, damn well better be the features that are important to that customer and to their situation. You may have the world's greatest POS system that can literally do everything front and back of the house, everything that's needed. But if all they needed is, some basic front of the house features just to make sure that they can get customers in and out quickly, scan their barcodes, ring them up, take cashless payments or something like that. If that's the only stuff they wanted, that should be the only stuff you're talking about. Maybe you mentioned the other stuff is, hey, there's other great features. We can get into those later, but I want to focus on the stuff that's important to you right now. Knowing who your customers are. Know your customers, and you mentioned this, know your decision makers. Know if you are going into a presentation, are you talking to the person who's going to decide to give you access to a decision maker, maybe punt you up the line to the person who actually will sign off on your product, or are you talking to the person who is going to make that decision? Because that can be also two different types of presentations. Maybe you don't even need to be presenting to the person that's not the decision maker.
I'm going to stop you right there because I've got a use case on just those two. What does work in a presentation, couldn't agree more. Relevant features, right? Sometimes that takes a little bit of homework, and knowing your customer and who the decision makers are. So back in a previous life before BlueStar here, I worked for, again, a reseller. We started getting into digital signage. One of the big presentations that we had the capability to do was actually locally here at the Duke Energy Center. They had put out an RFP to put in digital signage system for the Duke Energy Center, which is our convention center here in Cincinnati. And at the time, very few convention centers had ever done it. So we were able, of course, we knew the features that they were looking for from the RFP, right? So, and that's pretty traditional in a lot of sales. Salespeople will look at the RFP, and they're checking the box. Yep, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. But we were able to get what I'll call a pre-presentation conference with them, or a call with them, so that we could dig a little bit deeper into some of the things that they were doing or looking to do from a feature set. And believe it or not, one of the features they were looking for was RS-232 connection between the displays and the back of house so that they could control in back of house. That wasn't in the RFP. Gotcha. So, and one of the decision makers was an engineer. He was definitely... he didn't have the final, so I guess is what you would call an influencer, heavy influencer, though, because part of whatever the engineer said, we can deal with this system is going to get the go ahead. Right. So learning that little nugget, do you think I put that into the presentation?
Of course.
Oh, heck yeah. And I'm pretty sure it's a nugget that the competition didn't have. So to your point,
did you win the business?
We did, and awesome. it was the.
Say
biggest,
if you didn't, I was gonna say don't listen to any of this because I know, right?
It was the biggest contract, biggest digital signage contract that at the time had ever gotten, and that lasted for many, many years. But anyway,
that's awesome.
It was a biggie. It was a huge deal. So, but just knowing, and isn't that funny how just one little feature set, and of course there were multiple things, other points that went into for Duke Energy making that center decision. But still, that was one that, man, I'm telling you, our presentation really sung because we could show that feature worked. Yeah.
Well, and that was my next bullet
point. And to the right
point.
person.
Yeah, exactly. Right? That was my next bullet point was do your diligence before the presentation.
Yep, got it.
Know who you need to be talking, not just know who you need to be talking to, but what do you need to be focused on? And as you mentioned, standard RFP may not have all the information that you need. It may have the good technical specs, and you may know, I can check all these boxes and bring this in, and this is what they said they were looking for. May not actually be what they need if you didn't actually bother talking to anybody ahead of time.
Who's to say that you couldn't send, the prospect an email prior to the presentation saying, hey, by the way, these are high level. This is what I'm going to be covering in my presentation. I respect your time.
Right.
What in here would you like me to focus in on? I mean, I think some people would react kindly to that. I know I would.
Right.
If I'm looking at a list of 8 bullet points that this person has in their presentation, dude, I'm only interested in points number 2 and 4. And really, I want to understand points 2 and 4 really, really well.
Right.
I would give them that feedback. And as a sales rep, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's my features, but I'm going to focus in on number 2 and 4 for you. So, in order to do that due diligence, you can't be afraid sometimes to ask those questions.
Not at all.
Right? Because what you're trying to do is craft the right presentation. that's going to make efficient use of everybody's time. Sorry.
No. This is exactly what we're doing this for. I want your
Right.
So the other 2 points I got: keep it engaging.
Keep it engaging. Yep.
Which again, we've kind of alluded to this. Like, try to do more listening than talking. I know that's hard to do in a sales presentation. It's they're there to listen to you talk essentially, but you should be engaging with them and asking questions and getting feedback, even if it's just a simple like, yeah, you're on the right track, we can move on kind of thing. If you're not engaging with them and you're just going start to finish, sometimes you can see it. You can look at their faces and see like, crap, I'm losing these people. Or you may be off in a completely different direction where they are mentally going, nah, this is wrong. And you can get that opportunity to to course correct and shift your strategy if you needed to in that conversation. And then my last bullet point is, this lends itself to the whole always be closing idea that like you still can be closing even if your presentation isn't meant to close somebody around the spot, but you can either be asking for the business at the end of the conversation or at the very least set your next meeting or set your next expectations. And we're going to get into this a little bit more when I talk about the methodology that I think is very helpful on this. But there's something to be said for like if you reach an end of a presentation and you're just kind of standing there and like, what do you think? You should expect to get very little, or like, oh, well, thanks, that was interesting, we'll be in touch or something,
It's not professional.
Right. If at
really
the end,
isn't.
instead, if you're asking like, hey, so I've outlined all of this for you, I think I have a good understanding of what you're trying to do here. Does this work for you? Can we get your business? When can we get started on this project? Or maybe it's hey, I realize there's gonna be a lot to talk about on the back end. You guys are gonna have a lot to decide. Let's schedule our next meeting and figure out when we're gonna talk about this next. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff you're telling someone like, I expect there to be movement after this, not just me walking out the door and hoping that you give me a call next week.
Yeah, and you would think that this would be like in the no-brainer category, but I'm
hardest
telling
thing to
you,
do.
I've sat through many, because it sounds like we both manage people in sales, right? So I have sat through many a presentation where the sales rep that I'm managing doesn't do a bad job on the presentation, did it homeworks, checking a lot of the boxes that we're saying here, and at the end, it's like radio silence. No, that's death. What are you doing? No, you gotta.
It's the fear of rejection.
Yeah,
that's a big part of it.
I guess so.
If you ask for someone's business and they say no, I mean, let's be honest, that is literally the worst thing that can happen to you, but it's also, you're done, like you've done your diligence.
Going down the path of, asking for the close at the end of the presentation. I think that what people do appreciate is, one, being given a list of options of possible next steps, and then two, confirming what those next steps are. Right. Nobody likes leaving a meeting saying, well, I learned something, but I don't know what we're doing next. I mean, to me, that is the absolute worst. So even if your presentation closes with something along the lines of, an action item or, can we schedule something so I can have a better understanding of how we can win this opportunity, something along the lines, be professional about it, because your audience is expecting some kind of professional and they'll like it. People like having some type of closure to this presentation, and we know what's happening next along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. Anything else you would add to
going
what
back
does
to the
work?
keeping engagement, one of the tricks that this is a pro tip, I guess, along the way. Well, one of the tips that I would use in a presentation is use cases. I think that people like to learn from what other people are doing that are similar to themselves.
Agreed.
So if you're a reseller that's in POS, you probably have many of them that you could queue up. But I'll just liken back to, again, my experience back in digital signage. One of the bigger presentations that I had given was to Christiana Healthcare Services System. They're throughout Maryland, and huge medical system, hospitals, doctors' offices, the whole thing. And they were looking into digital signage in the weight room. Well, we had done a project. We had done a couple projects actually here locally through Children's Hospital and whatnot. And so I had some experience there. And in the presentation, there were some points in time in the presentation, as you were talking about, where, there's some ebbs and flows in the presentation. And sometimes people get tuned off a little bit. And all you have to do is interject some use cases. Hey, we did this over at the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. how do you think your audience would react to that? Or, bring in some of those experiences. I used to love to leverage those because I think that genuinely you're getting good information from that. Number one, you're conveying obviously that you understand their world, but you're getting genuine feedback when you do use cases like that. It kind of brings down those barriers of that people can can be standoffish, and it ups your authenticity, which is awesome because that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to build a relationship with these people, and if they know that you kind of already understand their world, there's a lot to it, and it can help with the engagement during the presentation.
Yep.
I can any presentation that I've been involved in, if I am engaged, I feel better about it walking out of the room, right? If I'm just in one of these presentations where I'm sitting back and listening, dude, I don't know, 10 minutes later, if you ask me, what was that all? I don't know. What was that guy presenting?
I don't know. I zoned out for like 5 minutes there.
But if I'm engaged along the way, or if they're showing me use cases of something really simple and they've done a little bit of homework behind it, I'm going to remember the presentation, and probably so much back so that I can go back to my team, maybe even a little excited about what I just learned. And hey, I was just talking to this person about this and da-da-da-da-da.
Yep.
So much better. Much better.
Definitely.
So really good points on what does work. Keeping engagement absolutely works. Asking for the business or doing something professional at the end absolutely works. Really simple steps, right?
Yeah.
But you've got a methodology.
So at my last gig, it was one of those jobs like that. It wasn't necessarily a fit for me and where I was in my particular career path at that time. But I did learn an incredibly valuable sales presentation method there. And it was one of those things like we were debating when I was talking about this. I'm like, should I talk about it as it is? Is it proprietary? But I looked it up online, and there's a company called Impacts that actually teaches. In fact, I did go to a training for them up in Chicago. I think they're a relatively small company, but they do a lot around presentations and about how to find decision makers and how to guide your way to a great presentation. And honestly, this particular methodology can be used in a lot of different ways. It doesn't have to be just for a sales presentation, but it's most effective, I think, in a presentation where you are, again, trying to kind of sell yourself or your company and not necessarily about a very specific product. If you're, if it's just a product, maybe you don't get this involved. But if you're trying to sell who you are as a company and trying to establish a relationship with a partner and why they should be working with you, I think this is a good way to approach it.
Which is something, which, by the way, should be your goal.
Exactly.
Right?
It should, yeah. Because let's be honest, even if you're just selling them a product, that's a future potential customer. Somebody who buys something from you once is someone that could buy something from you for the next 30 years. You don't know that. Like, just because they came to you once and just said, hey, all I need is a barcode scanner.
Right.
That doesn't mean that they're not going to next year come to you and ask for a rollout of a massive digital signage project for an arena or something. Any customer that comes to you today for something simple and small could very easily be a customer that is with you for life and comes to you next year for the biggest project you've ever seen. And in a lot of what you do in that one sale and that one conversation could make an impact. So,
100%.
Why not always be, maybe not closing, always be presenting, always be selling yourself, always be
absolutely,
discovering what you need to know about them.
Yeah. So we're zooming in on the presentation,
yes.
right?
So,
we got a methodology for effective presentation.
Exactly. So it's called the Tufa Method, which stands, it's TUFA. It stands for them, us, fit, action.
Them, us, fit, action.
Right.
Got it.
Now, the presumption before you've gotten to this point is that you have done what they call discovery, which is, basically just having some in-depth calls with people maybe within the company that aren't necessarily the key decision makers, but are people that may be a little more in tune to, let's say they're the person whose job is going to be to go out and install a particular product, or maybe they're the salesperson whose job it is to go out and be on the front line and talk about products to people. But the decision maker is going to decide whether they're going to sell your products or bring your products in or actually buy your products, is the person that you're going to eventually need to talk to. So maybe you spend some time with them and learn a little bit about them and learn their pain points so that by the time you get to a decision maker and maybe they help you introduce you to that decision maker, you're a little bit armed with like what's happening on the lower levels below that decision
so
maker.
This methodology presumes that you've done some of that.
Exactly. Now you could trot it out on any person, but I think it's most effective if you've already, again, done that diligence. You've talked to the right people. You understand that business, because that's where the first part, the them, of this presentation kicks in.
And I'll give a pro tip there. If I can,
Go for it.
Are we creating like a new segment? Pro tips.
That's something for the soundboard right there.
Right?
Pro
Yeah.
tips.
Yeah, Marco, we need to work on that. We need a little sound there. But anyway, don't you dare hit the board. No, I'm just kidding. But what I would do from time to time, especially on larger projects that were going to be multifaceted, I would actually go to the facility. So I'll go back to the healthcare facility I was just talking about and some of the deals that we were involved in and some of the presentations that we had to give in front of healthcare boards and things like that. I would go to the facility. I would walk around. Where is this going to be used? I would try, not in an awkward way, but if I caught eye contact with a worker or something like that, or if somebody was looking at me like, "Hey, what are you doing here? Why are you looking at the walls so weird?"
Right.
I would say, "Well, we're giving a presentation on digital signage, and this is what it could be used for. Do you think it would be helpful?" And just have that little bit of dialogue. I love where you were just going with that. When you can come into a presentation with what I would call some trench knowledge, what's going on in the trenches and what people really think would be an effective use, and bring that up in the presentation. Hopefully this Tufa method uses that, because
it does.
That's powerful.
Because, and here's the thing about doing that too, it doesn't even have to be something you accredit to specific people. Like if you want to talk to someone and they want to kind of talk to you off the record a little bit about it, you can get that information from them that you can use for the presentation without attributing it to them. You can say, you don't necessarily have to go in and say, well, hey, I talked to your chief engineer,
right,
and they said that like your current digital signage is an absolute joke,
right,
and they are looking for something new. No, that person doesn't want you doing that to the top dog. But if instead you have those conversations and you go in armed with that knowledge and say, hey, I understand your current digital signage is not necessarily what you are hoping for or would expect. That sometimes it's glitchy, or maybe it doesn't have all the features that you expected out of that. That way, the person you're talking to knows, like, all right, they know what's happening here. I don't know who they talk to, but they know what's happening here. So that's the them part, where you talk about what you've learned and understand about their business, their needs, their current environment. You put all that out there on the table, and then, and this was always a key part of it, before you move on at all, you stop and ask the decision maker, because you should know who that person is in the room. There may be a bunch of other people, influencers, maybe there's a couple decision makers, but you ask at least that key decision maker, like, am I on the right track? Do I have an understanding? Do I understand your business and your needs? And if for some reason, ideally you're doing this, they're going to say yes, because you should have done your homework. But if for some reason they do say no, hey, then you stop right there. And you have a conversation about what they actually are thinking is going on. And maybe that means you literally maybe walk out the door and come back and finish the presentation later, or maybe it means you alter it on the fly. But that's a critical component, because if you go and spout everything you think you know about them and you're dead wrong, you've ruined the entire rest of your presentation.
Love the confirmation aspect of it, because I cannot tell you how many times I went through that. Tried to get validation that I'm on the right path in this presentation, and I understand your world, them. You get the decision maker, and maybe they'll confirm it. Yep, everything you said is dead on. Oh, but also I've got this in my mind, or that wouldn't have been unearthed. And now you realize that, what's really on the decision maker's mind is this.
Yep.
So to the committee who wrote the RFP, or the committee who's involved in the aggregate decision, okay, I got this part of the presentation, but the decision maker has all that plus this.
Exactly.
No other way you're going to unearth that than to ask and get that validation.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
So from there, assuming you do that, and they give you that validation, say, yeah, you're on the right track. Then you can even say, hey, great, because the entire rest of this presentation is built on me being right about this. So let's move on. So then you talk about us, which is yourself, your company, your product, whatever it is that you're there to pitch. And this is where, again, you don't get into that feature dumping. You don't start wasting time telling them every little thing they need to know about you, when your company was founded, what the name of the president is, how many installations you've done, unless that stuff's relevant. Like, if they're making a decision based on who you are as an overall company, fine. But you talk about the stuff that's relevant to the them piece that you've just gone through. So I would literally look back at those, whatever slides or whatever you talked about in the them, like, hey, I understand this, this, and this about your business. It's good to keep it maybe to 2 or 3 key points. Your us should be about, hey, here's what you need to know about us. And those us statements should all in some way reflect on what your company can do related to those particular needs.
Got it.
So you get through that.
Well, I'm so glad earlier in this podcast I talked about how I love to use use cases.
Yes, you're on it. No,
because I think that that's a perfect way of kind of weaving the
It
us
is. Yep.
into the them, right? This is what we have done in healthcare digital signage, by the way, Christiana Care. That's what we did. You know, we kind of weaved. This is what we did at the Holzer Clinic. This is what we did at Children's Hospital. And oh man, okay.
Yeah,
Who
exactly.
knew I was doing the two?
You already were. That's just it. A lot of this is somewhat intuitive. It's
Right.
just about giving yourself a structure so that when you are putting a presentation together, you are thinking about these steps.
Got it.
And when you're presenting it, you're still thinking about this as well, so you don't get yourself off track and start going off and rambling about something that doesn't have any real relevance here.
Okay.
So you get done with them, you get done with us. Well, then the next step is fit, which is basically where you're putting this all together and you're telling them, all right, based on what I understand about you, based on what I've just told you about us, here's where you and I working together is going to fix your problem. You know, the stuff that I just told you that we can do is going to fix this need. The other thing I told you that we're great at is going to help you out with this need. So you're breaking that down and making it as clear as it can possibly be. This is where you and me working together is a great fit. And then again, you have another check step here at the end where you say, do you agree that we have a good fit?
Gotcha.
And it's one of those moments where you shut up and wait for the answer.
Absolutely. The
close your
pregnant
mouth.
pause is good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If that pause lasts 10 whole seconds and they're looking at you blinking, you keep doing it. because you know, if you're the one that talks first and start babbling on some more because you start getting nervous,
Right.
you've lost.
Yeah.
So you let them give you that answer. And again, for the most part, the answer is probably going to be yes. Even if they aren't planning to buy from you, maybe you're still not going to win this
Right.
business.
Yeah. And we've
At the
all
very
been in those
least-
presentations
right.
too. Right.
At the very least, they have to acknowledge that, yeah, you did it. You did your diligence. You understand us. Sounds like what you do is a fit for what we're doing here. I agree. So once that happens, then you move on to the last phase, which we've talked about that action piece where you maybe not ask for the business, but the goal is to create some sort of action plan next. If you are at a point where you can move forward with the business, say, all right, well, hey, we're going to get a presentation together for you, get you some quotes and pricing or something, get information over to you about exactly how much this is going to cost and when we can start it. Great. Maybe it's something where you're just like, hey, now that we've established this, our next meeting, I want us to get together on this date at this time and talk about, how we can do this in phases, what we can tackle in phases. Doesn't mean that they've committed to it. They may not commit to it at all. They may not say like, sure, let's do that. They may say, well, let's look at our calendar and think about this. I'm not available that day, but maybe we can do some other day. But you've already pigeonholed them into hopefully committing to some next step rather than, again, just saying, all right, I'm done. Let me know if you've got, let me know if you have any questions. Let me know if you're interested. Here's my phone number. Because you do that, then you've ruined everything you've just done.
Right.
So you have to create some sort of action step there at the end to advance the conversation, whether it's advancing right on to the sale or it's advancing into the next step of this process that's going to get you closer to it.
Gotcha.
So what are your thoughts on Tufa?
Yeah, no, I like it. Who knew? I didn't know what Tufa was walking into this podcast, but I am refreshingly reaffirmed that all that I had been doing for 16 whatever years of selling, they actually had a methodology to it. But I'll tell you, it's brilliant. And what I like about it, as you were talking, John, and as I sit back and think about it, this is relative to not just a big sale.
Right.
It's relative to anything, any type of presentation. It could be a presentation of a point of sale system to a very small mom-and-pop retail establishment, or a small manufacturer who you're walking in the door that has limited needs of ADC or mobile device technology. But man, you still want to apply this type of presentation. And it might happen very quickly, right? That whole sales cycle might happen actually in one meeting. Back in the day when people would actually do door-to-door sales, it was everything. It was the cold call, the presentation, the close, and the order all in one thing. But anyway, I think you can apply this Tufa even in a small deal type of an orientation.
Yeah, definitely.
Or even if it's just, a conversation that you're having with the president of again, a small manufacturer but applying this, because at the end of the road, what I like about it, and my goal at a presentation was always to make sure that what I'm conveying, I'm going to use your word, fit. I wouldn't have used that word before, but that's a really good one. is what I know and what I just presented a good fit? Are we showing a good fit here? Meaning, I mean, I guess I was one of those sales reps that like to have a little bit of feeling into the deal, right? I wanted it to feel right. I wanted to make sure that what I was presenting actually was going to work.
Right.
And I didn't want to walk out of the room and be one of those reps like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I don't know if we can do half the stuff that I just talked about, but, well, we'll get it figured out. I'm going to reach my goal. I get my quote. I get paid. I'm out the door.
Right.
I wasn't that kind of guy. I wanted to make sure that it was a good fit, right? That the solution that we were building was actually going to fit for what their needs were. And sometimes I would walk out of a presentation and I'd have to retool. I'd have to retool the solution because of something that was unearthed during the presentation. And that would be the action item coming out of it. The at the end would be, okay, so, I came in understanding this part. I'm pivoting a little bit because of what I've learned today. And so that's the action item. I'm going to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to whatever.
Because it's very possible at that fit point when you do ask about that they tell you like, yes, but and maybe they unveil something that you just quite didn't get right, or maybe they give you something new that you had no idea they were. I think you mentioned earlier, like where you went in and you were pitching one thing, but found out like, hey, I need something entirely different. Like, great,
which was mostly
you came here to talk about POS, but we actually have a bigger need for digital signage right now. So let's talk about that instead. Then fine.
Or inventory tracking.
Right. Exactly.
And, great. Okay. So the need has modified a little bit, which is awesome because your company, not the one you're selling, your customer's company is going to benefit from a more holistic solution. Right. So that's actually what happened most of the time is what was unearthed was, you know what? Yeah, we kind of thought we needed digital signage that had content that was just this, but now that you've unveiled that we can tap into real-time sources and do these other things, yeah, we kind of need to rethink this a little bit. And so that was maybe some of the action item was, just, okay, now researching, coming up with the right solution.
And maybe you go back in 3 weeks and do another presentation the same way again, but now on a different topic. Or you do like a smaller modified version of it. We're like, hey, last time we were here, we already went through like what we do, what we know. Yep. But again, I still want to make sure, do I have this right about you? Here's what we can do for you. Do we have a fit again? Like
I love it. I love it. I mean, had I known, I would have walked into the door. Them, us, fit, action. That's what we're doing here. Tufa, them, us, fit, action. It's good. It's good. Can we sidebar on some other things about a presentation?
Yeah, please do. I was going to ask if you had anything else.
What do you think about when you walk into a presentation where you have multiple people from your company in the presentation and the importance of defining the roles before you walk in the door?
Ooh, that's a good point.
I've been in presentations where, it's mano a mano, or it's just me and however many people on the other side of the desk.
Right.
I'm good with that. I understand that. I can hold my end of the table, if you will. But I've also been in those meetings where I'll have multiple people from the company involved. Now you've got multiple personalities. Who's running the show?
Right.
Who's got the alpha? Who's got the alpha personality?
Right.
Is probably going to be stepping all over. Who's managing that? I think there's a lot of, before we get kind of, whenever I think about presentations, that's one of those things that it's like, ooh, man, know the roles, right? Know who's going to be talking, who's running the show, who's going to be talking about which section. Yep. And now that I know Tufa, I would have been teaching everybody, hey, this is how this is going down, right?
And you could split, let's say you had 4 people on your team or something, or 2 or 3 or whatever.
Yep.
You could split those sections up between them. Or maybe it's a fact of where like, you're the great sales guy who's good at like talking about the overall company and what you can do and what you can establish, but you've got someone who's great on the technical side of things and can explain that stuff. So maybe you decide ahead of time, like, look, you're going to talk, when we get to the us section, you're going to talk all about the tech specs. If any questions come up around technology, I'm going to turn to you and let you answer those. But you're right. I think having those clearly defined roles ahead of time, so you don't have a bunch of people stepping all over themselves, or you don't have someone, piping up and saying, well, let me explain that a little bit better, because you're alluding to like, maybe this person isn't actually explaining it right in this presentation. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's important, and maybe just doing some practice runs. That was something when these presentations
absolutely.
Usually, like if I had to give one, we almost always were asked to go in front of the manager and do it to them and treat them as if they were the decision maker, and they would tell you like, all right, this part's strong, that part's strong. this is the part you probably need to fix a little bit. Run that stuff in front of somebody. If you have the time and the ability, do it to someone else.
Even if you're a small reseller, right? Like if you're a small reseller, you only have 20 people. That's the reseller that was the size of the company I was working for. We had 20 to 25 employees. We would still do the test. I would go down and say, okay, I want to give you portions of the presentation and see if this makes sense. And not only as a sounding board, but a lot of times I like to hear, what am I saying? Am I saying it correctly? That type of thing. Practicing is a good one. You can do it with your own people.
Yep.
Because believe it or not, some serendipitous moments come out of that too.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, hey, by the way, while you're talking about this, I was just doing this project with this other customer, and you might want to bring that up, type of a thing. I'd learn all kinds of little gold nuggets like that.
Oh, yeah.
When I would present in front of our team. Or at least little snippets of it before I would walk in.
Or
the
even
door.
stuff like, hey, I noticed when you're presenting, you use a lot, or you get twitchy with this certain part of your body, or you look impatient or something. That's something to watch out for. Never know.
I like the Tufa though. I like it.
Definitely. Anything else you've got? Any other thoughts?
No, we've touched on a lot.
Yeah.
And obviously we could do some more on just sales and stuff like that. It sounds like you and I could bring a little bit of some experience there. But when you think about value to the VAR, I guess, which is where we're going here next. Again, what I like about this is that, it doesn't matter what size reseller you are. And I have a love and an affinity for small to medium sized resellers, because that's what I was. And I would battle up against the big guys from time to time too, and loved it when I would kick their butt.
Right.
And because we would out present them. I really do feel like the presentation is a way of differentiating yourselves on so many different levels. It's the interpersonal. It's you being able to get to know the customer, what's on their mind, what's on their side of the desk, what are they worried about. Yeah, okay, we're here to talk about it, at a high level, some technology or a solution, but what are they really looking for? But also, and I love this about the us part of the Tufa. Hey, by the way, I'm a partner in this, right? This part of this presentation is not only learning from you, but so that you can learn from me about how I think I'm going to be a good fit.
Right.
Which, if you have that mindset walking in that this is a partnership and you're trying to learn a little bit about them and you want them to learn about you, I think the Tufa it's a great way. It does nail it in that sense that is it's so critical, because that is going to be the foundation for a great relationship moving forward, which ultimately is what you would want to do. Even if you sell commodities, even if it's just, a pen or something like that.
Right.
There's a reason. There's a reason why there's a relationship there. There's a reason why you need the company you work for needs sales.
Right.
It's because of that relationship. It's because you can bring more value to the table. You just do it.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty good way of doing it.
Yeah, I agree.
When I look at it.
Well, and you kind of mentioned like the commodities thing, like, there's still this, I think, perception that people buy based on price, and that's it. Like that if you have the lowest price, you're better suited to win the business than anybody else. And sometimes I think that's where like the giant companies, the big companies, maybe go in and think like, hey, we're going to beat everybody else on price because we can, because we're this massive
volume.
company.
Right.
And the small to medium guys think like, well, I have to price higher because that's the only way I can meet my overhead and keep operating. So how else am I going to differentiate? I'm walking in here to lose. So that's the same thing I kind of was thinking here. Is my value point is this kind of presentation, giving yourself this kind of step above what your competition might be doing is the kind of thing that will set you apart. I know, like, for again, the company where I learned this from, this food service equipment supplier, we were not the low price company. We acknowledged that. We told people that even in our presentations, like, look, we're not going to have the cheapest spoon or food pan for your buffet. Remember when buffets were a thing?
Yeah, right.
We're not going to have that. However, we have built this entire methodology around presentation. We understand how food presentation works. We understand how to draw people's attention to want to go eat from a buffet or make them go buy more or, add on something or whatever. Like, that was our goal. And so we explained that and how using us benefited them in that way instead of the price point thing. And that was how a lot of times we won business. Like, yeah, sure, you can go online to this, online only dealer and buy all the cheap stuff you want. But that's still good. At the end of the day, it's going to be your job to go out there and put it out and draw people in. we're going to help you with that part of it too. So I think, that's that differentiator that you mentioned for small to medium
100%.
businesses
Yeah.
is the big guys, they go in there expecting to win the business just because of their name, their volume, their pricing, and just it's what they do. They just they're going to have that attitude walking in the door. You get to go in and say, look, I understand you. I literally was on your floor last week talking to your people, looking around, seeing the situation that you're in right now, looking at your current equipment. This is what I understand about you. This is what I've researched, and this is why I'm going to be able to help you out, even if it costs you a little bit more than the other guys could offer.
But it's genuine, it's authentic, and it's meaningful, and it is a differentiator. I'll just say it again. A presentation is a great way for you to start distinguishing yourself from the competition.
Agreed.
A story that I have is that, again, going back to that Christiana Healthcare, we were, and still the company that I used to work for, still to this day, is a boutique digital signage shop. That's what they do. Or one of the things that they do. But in that particular deal, we were going up against one of the heavy hitters, I'm not going to name them, one of the heavy hitters that is still around in digital signage and their internal team. So it was their direct team that we were up against. So you have this behemoth digital signage company, right? That had the suits that were ironed and pressed and whatever, and had the story and had all the resources. And here's this little reseller that had a lot of experience. It just happened to be a lot of experience in digital signage and healthcare, and could and understood, the them, the us, the fit, and here's what we can do. Ended up winning that deal too, but I do believe the presentation was part of the differentiating part. Yeah.
Well, look at you. You've already been doing this. I'm preaching to the choir here.
Preaching to the choir.
But hopefully our listeners got something useful out of this.
Absolutely.
And we want to hear from you if that's the case. If you feel like you have, that you got a great tip you want to share with us, or maybe some awesome things you've done yourself, again, try this out. If it works, tell us about it. We want to hear.
Yeah.
You can find us, as always, on Twitter at TEConnectPod. You can email us, TEConnect@BlueStarInc.com. We want to wrap things up with our favorite segment every week.
Absolutely.
Well, at least it's my favorite segment.
I love it.
What's Tech Connecting with you? Longtime listeners, you know the deal here. We talk about a piece of technology or something cool or fun that we're playing with, using, reading about, that we found interesting. Dean, as always, I'll let you start. What's Tech Connecting with you?
All right, so you are to blame for this one, my friend. So in a previous podcast, you mentioned that you were listening to a podcast called Newcomers, which is around Star Wars, right?
Yep.
And so I forget the ladies' names.
Lauren Lapkus and Nicole Byers.
Thank you. And it is a funny podcast, and they review. It's these two people that had never seen Star Wars before, any Star Wars, and so they're coming into it cold, but had heard of all this stuff. Anyway, not about the podcast, but I started listening to that podcast, and one of the things that they talked about and they get into is CGI versus live action.
Oh, yeah.
And so what's Tech Connecting with me? I can remember back in the day when CGI came out, and I guess the Phantom Menace was one of those first ones that had a lot of CGI, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the Jar Jar Binks, and everybody, if you
It's
go
all
back
green screens.
and if you go back and look at it, it's in today's standards pretty bad.
Right.
But anyway, at the time it was like, whoa, and Terminator 2, I remember that movie coming out. It was just revolutionary use of CGI, and to this day that still holds up.
Yep.
But what's Tech Connecting with me is, man, a love of live action, because what I'm learning on the podcast, and when I think about it, it's so true. The original 3 Star Wars that came out, there was no CGI. Everything was what they call live in camera, right? I mean, the sets were sets. They weren't drawn.
Models, hand-moved models,
there is a certain beauty to that. And I hope there is someday a renaissance of having that in filmmaking, because so cool. Yes, limiting, but from a user experience, and this is Lauren's and what's the other lady's name? Nicole's. What their point is that they really love that. And of course, they're in the industry.
Right.
But anyway, they really love that about the early Star Wars.
Right.
And now that they're watching the CGI Star Wars, it's like, okay, it's okay and all, but
it's a cartoon with some people.
Yeah, but it misses what was so awesome about the early Star Wars. So what's Tech Connecting with me? Maybe going a little old school, going live action, as my daughter would say.
I am 100% on board with that, because it has always been one of my talking points about why I love the original trilogy and didn't struggled a lot with the prequel trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, beyond the fact that like, I was born and raised in the time when the original trilogy was a thing, and it was the only Star Wars I knew for 20 years, But I agree with you. Like those original special effects, and I'm talking about even the originals, even before he tinkered with them and shoved some CGI stuff in.
Which I've come to learn they remastered and relaunched
those of us,
them.
he still tinkers.
Who
to this
knew
day.
Jabba the Hutt wasn't actually in? Anyway, your eyes are rolling. Go ahead.
Right. I seriously, we could have a whole podcast just me ranting about Star Wars. Marco would join us easily for that, our producer. So. But yeah, I completely agree with you. There is something to be said for that. And I will give credit to the newer trilogy, which, has had mixed reception from fans. I personally like most of it for the most part. There's some problems with it as well. But they did commit to a lot more of that in-camera effects.
Yep.
Like there's not as much CGI in those movies. And you can tell it feels, the whole point of Star Wars and why we loved it so much was it felt like a lived-in universe. That's one of the things that us fans always point to is like the Millennium Falcon didn't look like some pristine starship gleaming from the future. It looked like a piece of junk that could fall apart at any time. That was the joke. That was the gag.
It looked like a truck that had been down the road quite a few times.
Exactly.
Right?
And there is something to be said for that. And I feel like that is starting to become a thing again, or if it's not actually a thing that people are doing, at the very least, digital effects are starting to learn how to replicate that much better than before. Where now you get to the point where like it looks almost seamless. Like I'm not catching the digital aspect as much as I used to. But you're right. When that trilogy came out, man, it was so glaringly obvious. And if you go back and look at him now, you're just like, he was trying to do something way sooner than he should have tried to do it.
Revolutionary. I'll give him that. Changed the industry by
definitely.
the use of CGI and whatnot. But I'll just say it again. Hopefully there's a renaissance in filmmaking. Anyway, what's TEConnecting with you, my friend?
Like I said, I could keep going about Star Wars forever.
Right. I got to cut you off.
Yeah, my TEConnect this week. This was actually something I saw in the feed of one of our previous guests, Dr. Christine Perales.
All right.
She posted something on LinkedIn about MIT had created an autonomous robot for basically doing cleaning in warehouses and distribution centers. And so it could even potentially be used like in schools or other facilities, offices as well, to basically strip coronavirus by using UV technology. I think it's UVC. Yes. So now obviously the catch with UVC is it's very dangerous for people.
Oh,
so you can't have a person out there walking around with a UVC, at least of any kind of magnitude.
But a robot.
But autonomous robot could. So they actually designed this autonomous robot. It's just like a tall, thin structure with like what looks like, 4, like light tubes on each side or whatever. And basically, I think they said they can get through like a 4,000 square foot warehouse within 30 minutes. And it just rolls up and down the aisles. It's peppering everything with this UV while everybody's out. No one's in the in the building at the time. When it's done, basically you've eliminated most of the surface, potential for coronavirus, as well as all the aerosolized
I'll be darned
infection that could be in the air.
Right.
30 minutes time, it can sweep over. Now, I don't know if this is, out for practical use yet, or if, how much of this is going to, actually get out into the world anytime soon. But that's that kind of innovation where I'm like, man, this is smart people coming up with a very practical, smart application for something that's so in the moment right now.
Yeah,
and even once we're past COVID-19, however long that's going to be, it's something I don't see any reason why you couldn't potentially use something like this. Because let's be honest, there's infectious crap running around every site. But imagine like if you could do that in a hardware store. I don't know if it's something you'd want to do in a grocery store. I don't know if the effect that could have on like food or live produce or anything. But like just imagine like if every facility at the end of the night had one of these robots that just goes and cycles through and basically just kind of cleans everything up for the next shift or for the next day and removes all these toxins.
Now I got to research. Why is it not good for humans? Is it looking at the light? Is it being
I don't know if it's that or
it?
if it's just too much exposure is like too high.
Is it like an X-ray? Like if you get zapped with it, you're okay, but you don't want to sit in front of the lamp.
Probably.
Kind of
It was a CNN article I was reading. They didn't dive too far into that. They just said like it's it's not healthy. It's one of those things I think overexposure would be bad.
Yeah.
Like you can probably be exposed to a little bit, but too much would be
Okay. Yeah.
Just head you down the road to disaster.
Well, I like that.
So good, interesting concept.
That's a good one.
Definitely something that tech connected with me.
Maybe we should be distributing those robots. I don't
no
know.
doubt.
We'll see.
All right, so that does it for us. It is time for us to unplug. This has been a long conversation, but it's been a good one.
Yes,
I hope
sir.
everybody got something out of it.
Absolutely.
Again, let us know if you did. We might do more of these. I think you said we could ramble on about sales.
We could, but and the thing about it is the community. anyway, there's a need for understanding the sales process, what works, what doesn't work, getting validation even for the folks that are listening to this and they're out in the trenches every day. Maybe they're giving presentations. If they were using the Tufa like I was and didn't even realize it, awesome. Now you got some validation that you were doing it the right way.
There you go. You got to give us credit for it. Well, actually, you got to credit the people that I learned it from.
There
too,
you go.
So
there you go.
it's not even mine. Well, all right. That does it for us. As always, for Dean Reverman, I'm John Martin. Everybody, stay connected.
The TEConnect podcast is brought to you by ELO. Help businesses stay connected with ELO's new Huddle Kit, combining all their collaboration accessories, conference camera, computer module, styluses, and tray into one easy-to-order, purpose-built kit ready to connect with the interactive display for a robust huddle room solution. To learn more, visit ELO's microsite on BlueStarInc.com or contact your BlueStar account manager.